The geographical profile of the investigation centers on Skyline Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, a rural arterial road that winds through the Tualatin Mountains. The area is characterized by dense forestation, steep ravines, and limited cellular network coverage, factors that would later complicate the digital reconstruction of events. At the heart of this location sits Skyline Elementary School, the primary setting for the timeline, established on June 4th, 2010. Meteorological records for the region indicate that the morning was typical for the Pacific Northwest, with overcast skies and temperatures hovering in the mid-50s. The academic schedule at Skyline Elementary had been altered to accommodate the annual science fair, an event that disrupted the standard operating procedure for student arrivals and classroom attendance. Official logs indicate that 7-year-old Kyron Horman arrived at the school at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. He was transported in a white Ford F-250 pickup truck driven by his stepmother, Terry Horman. Witness statements from faculty and other parents placed the two in the gymnasium shortly after arrival. Kyron was there to set up his project, a display regarding the red-eyed tree frog. Forensic analysis of the timeline relies heavily on a specific piece of digital evidence created at this location. A photograph was taken of the student standing in front of his exhibit. Metadata extracted from the camera stamps this image at 8:14 in the morning. In the image, Kyron stands in front of his display board, wearing a black t-shirt with the letters CSI printed on the front, dark cargo pants, and white socks. This photograph represents the final confirmed visual record of the student on the school premises. The sequence of events following the science fair setup is derived largely from the initial statements provided by Terry Horman. She stated to law enforcement that at approximately 8:45 in the morning, the two left the gymnasium. According to her account, they walked down the hallway toward the student's assigned classroom, room 17. She reported watching the student walk toward the door of his classroom to stow his coat and backpack before she turned to leave the building. The timeline fractures at this precise juncture. Skyline Elementary, at that time, did not have a comprehensive surveillance video system covering all exits and hallways. This lack of digital surveillance meant that investigators had to rely entirely on witness testimony to verify who entered and exited the building. While the stepmother stated she watched the student walk toward his classroom, no independent witness could be found who positively identified the student entering the room or sitting at his desk. One student initially reported seeing Kyron near the south entrance, but this sighting could not be corroborated by physical evidence or additional testimony. Procedural records from the classroom indicate a critical lapse in the attendance verification process. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the bell rang, signaling the start of regular instruction following the science fair viewing period. The student's teacher, Christina Porter, marked Kyron as absent for the day. However, in subsequent interviews, it was revealed that due to the chaotic nature of the science fair and the presence of numerous parents, there was an assumption that the student had departed with his stepmother or was permitted to be elsewhere in the building. Consequently, the absence was not flagged as unexcused. The automated system designed to alert parents of an unexcused absence did not engage at that time. A systemic failure that allowed a window of several hours to pass without inquiry. Between the hours of 8:45 in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon, the location of the student remains the primary void in the investigation. During this interval, the stepmother's movements were reconstructed through a combination of receipts, surveillance footage, and cellular tower triangulation. Investigators tracked her trajectory away from the school shortly before 9 in the morning. Receipts placed her at a Fred Meyer grocery store in Beaverton at approximately 9:12 in the morning, where she purchased medication for allergies. Following this errand, the digital footprint created by her cellular device became a focal point for forensic data analysts. Terry Horman stated she drove her infant daughter around in the truck to induce sleep, a common parental tactic. However, cellular records indicated a period where her device pinged off a tower on Sauvie Island, a large rural area roughly 6 miles from the school. This location was not consistent with a direct route to her stated destinations. This specific window of time, between 10:10 and 11:39 in the morning, lacks direct eyewitness corroboration or surveillance footage. The timeline re-engages with verified data at 11:39 in the morning. Access logs from a local fitness center confirmed Terry Horman's entry at that time and her departure at approximately 12:40 in the afternoon. From there, she returned to the domestic routine. At the school, the day proceeded without the student present in class. It was not until the end of the academic day that the alarm was raised. The timeline intersects with the school's dismissal protocol at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. Kyron Horman, the student's father, along with Terry Horman, arrived at the designated bus stop to meet the school bus. When the transport arrived at 3:35, the driver discharged the students on the route, but Kyron was not among them. The driver indicated to the parents that the student had not boarded the transport at the school. This statement contradicted the assumption held by the parents that the student had remained at the institution for the duration of the day. The immediate response involved a transit back to Skyline Elementary. At approximately 3:45 in the afternoon, the parents entered the school administrative office to inquire about the student's whereabouts. It was at this moment that the discrepancy in the day's timeline was fully realized. The school staff confirmed that the student had been marked absent and had not been seen in class since the morning activities. Staff located Kyron's coat and backpack still inside room 17, indicating that while his personal effects had remained, the student had not been present for the instructional day. The first call to emergency services was logged at 3:57 in the afternoon. The dispatch records categorize the initial report as a lost child incident. Officers from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to the location. Upon arrival, law enforcement initiated a Level 1 search of the school premises. This involved a systematic sweep of the gymnasium, classrooms, utility closets, and the immediate perimeter of the building. The doctrine of evidence in missing person cases requires an immediate lockdown of the last known location. But due to the time delay between the disappearance and the report, the environment had been contaminated by the dismissal of students and the departure of faculty. By the evening of June 4th, the classification of the incident shifted. The failure to locate the student within the immediate vicinity of the school grounds necessitated the expansion of the search radius. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office mobilized search and rescue teams. Over the subsequent 48 hours, the operation expanded to include personnel from neighboring jurisdictions, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and specialized tracking canine units. Investigators noted that the environmental conditions presented significant challenges. The terrain surrounding Skyline Elementary consists of dense underbrush and steep inclines. The search grid was divided into sectors, with teams conducting line searches, a process where searchers stand shoulder to shoulder and advance systematically to ensure no visual evidence is missed. Despite these efforts, no physical trace of the student was recovered during the initial sweep. The failure of the attendance notification system remained a critical point of analysis for the school district and law enforcement. Had the automated call been successfully triggered at 10 in the morning, the window of the unknown would have been reduced by nearly 6 hours. This procedural error meant that the initial investigation began with a cold trail, significantly hampering the ability of law enforcement to secure the perimeter or canvass the area, while potential witnesses were still present. The delay allowed for weather changes and the degradation of potential scent trails that tracking canines might have utilized. Furthermore, the traffic at the school during the science fair meant that hundreds of vehicles had entered and exited the premises, contaminating tire track evidence. As the days turned into weeks, the status of the case transitioned from a rescue operation to a criminal investigation. By June 6th, the search operation had become one of the largest in Oregon history. Search logs indicate that over 1,300 searchers from Oregon, Washington, and California participated. They utilized grid search patterns, marking cleared areas with GPS coordinates. Simultaneously, detectives began the process of verifying alibis and constructing a verified timeline for all adults known to be in contact with the student that morning. The focus returned to the window of time involving the stepmother's movements. The investigation expanded the search grid to include Sauvie Island, based on the preliminary analysis of the cell tower pings registered by Terry Horman's phone. This area, characterized by agricultural land and waterways, required the deployment of dive teams and marine units. Investigators utilized side-scan sonar to map the riverbeds and ground-penetrating radar to check for disturbances in the soil. These technical searches were methodical, relying on geological data to identify anomalies. Yet, logs confirm that nothing of evidentiary value was retrieved. The family home became a secondary focal point for evidence collection. Computers and electronic devices were seized for forensic imaging. Analysts looked for search history, email communications, or any digital artifacts that might suggest premeditation or intent to leave the area. The white Ford F-250 pickup truck, driven by Terry Horman, was impounded and subjected to exhaustive forensic testing. Technicians scoured the interior for trace evidence, soil samples, botanical matter, or biological material that might contradict her stated movements. Although reports on the specific findings remain sealed or redacted in public releases, investigators indicated in later press briefings that no definitive physical evidence was discovered within the cabin or the truck bed. The inquiry also examined the relational dynamics within the household. A review of email servers and phone logs revealed growing tension. Investigators noted a series of emails sent by Terry Horman to a friend, in which she expressed deep dissatisfaction with her marriage to Kyron Horman and her role in the family. While marital discord is not proof of criminal intent, these communications provided detectives with a potential motive framework. A critical turning point in the procedural narrative occurred later in June, when investigators interviewed a landscaper, Rodolfo Sanchez, who had previously performed work for the Horman family. The individual provided a sworn statement alleging that Terry Horman had approached him months prior with a solicitation to end the life of her husband, Kyron Horman. According to the landscaper, she had offered financial compensation for the act. While this allegation did not directly reference Kyron, it fundamentally altered the risk assessment of the primary person of interest. Following this statement, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office orchestrated a controlled sting operation. The objective was to obtain a recorded admission or corroboration of the solicitation. Investigators equipped the landscaper with a wire and directed him to engage Terry Horman in conversation regarding the alleged plot. The operation, however, failed to yield a definitive confession. The audio logs from the encounter were inconclusive, and without a direct admission, the district attorney's office determined there was insufficient evidence to secure an indictment based on the solicitation charge alone. Despite the failure of the sting, the information was sufficient to disrupt the family dynamic. Law enforcement officials briefed Kyron Horman on the landscaper's allegations. Procedural records show that on June 26, 2010, Kyron Horman filed for a restraining order against Terry and moved out of the family home, taking their infant daughter with him. The affidavit filed with the court cited the police investigation and the allegation of the solicitation plot as the primary grounds for the request. This legal maneuver effectively severed Terry's access to the inner circle of the family and shifted the investigation from a cooperative missing persons case to a more adversarial criminal inquiry. Another avenue of inquiry involved the administration of polygraph examinations. Records indicate that Kyron Horman underwent a polygraph test and was cleared by investigators. Terry Horman was also asked to submit to a polygraph. Publicly, it was reported that she failed 2 separate examinations. From a procedural standpoint, however, polygraph results are inadmissible in court in the state of Oregon and serve only as an investigative tool to gauge deception. The failure of the tests hardened the detective's theory, but provided no legal mechanism to effect an arrest. As the investigation progressed into late 2010, the procedural focus fragmented. Several tips came in regarding sightings of the child in different states, necessitating coordination with federal agencies and local jurisdictions across the country. Each lead was chased down, analyzed, and ultimately dismissed. The investigation was also hampered by the tunnel vision phenomenon, often seen in high-profile cases. Because the circumstantial case against the stepmother was strong, fewer resources were initially allocated to alternative theories, such as a stranger abduction from the school grounds. Although authorities maintained that all avenues remained open, the civil legal battles continued alongside the criminal investigation. The divorce proceedings between Kyron and Terry Horman became a venue for information discovery. During depositions, attorneys for the father attempted to compel the stepmother to answer questions regarding the timeline of June 4th. However, invoking her rights under the Fifth Amendment, she refused to answer questions that could potentially implicate her in criminal activity. This procedural stalemate meant that the details of her movements during the critical hours remained legally protected and obscured from the public record. Public records indicate that a special grand jury was convened to review the evidence gathered against the stepmother. The proceedings of the grand jury are sealed by law, but the outcome was a matter of public record. No indictment was returned. The threshold for probable cause required to charge an individual with a crime related to the disappearance had not been met. The doctrine of evidence requires more than failed polygraphs, cell phone pings, and character concerns. It requires physical proof or a corroborating witness, neither of which the state possessed. 1 year after the disappearance, the task force released an age-progressed image of the child, a standard procedural step in long-term missing person cases. The lead investigators held a press briefing stating that the case remained active and that the stepmother remained the primary person of interest. They reiterated that her cooperation had ceased and that she had failed to account for her whereabouts for a specific period of the day. The context of the Kyron Horman case is defined by the initial procedural gaps: the gap in the attendance log, the gap in the surveillance coverage, and the gap in the timeline between the school drop-off and the report to authorities. These voids in the record created a complex puzzle for investigators, where the absence of evidence became as significant as the evidence itself. The search for the missing student would continue, driven by the rigid application of investigative process, yet hampered by the initial delays and the challenging geography of the Pacific Northwest. The tangible records of the Kyron Horman investigation, the thousands of tips, the terabytes of digital data, the soil samples, and the polygraph charts remain in the custody of the state. The timeline of June 4th, 2010, stands as a rigid sequence of minutes that investigators have analyzed for over a decade. The gap between 8:45 in the morning and the arrival of the school bus that afternoon remains the defining silence of the case. No arrest affidavit has ever been filed. No location of the missing individual has been identified. The process, while exhaustive, ultimately collided with the limitations of forensic science and the absence of direct observation.